All right, well, this is the Vanguard podcast, and I'm Gavin. And we've just been joined by Sam Sloan, who's an internationally renowned chess expert, the author of hundreds of books, and a candidate for president, Congress, governor, in many election cycles, as well as the last non-lawyer to win a Supreme Court case, which you won by 9-0. So we're really excited to be joined with you today and talk to you today about your various exploits throughout life, as well as attempting to win the Democratic nomination, the Libertarian Party nomination for various presidential elections. I figured a good question to begin with would just be, would you be able to describe a little bit your political philosophy or your political leanings?
Well, I don't really have a political philosophy. What happened to me was I've had some terrible tragedies in my life. That I'm from Lynchburg, Virginia. If you know anything about Lynchburg, Virginia, you know that's the Jerry Falwell headquarters of Jerry Falwell is headquarters of Lynchburg, Virginia, and there are a lot of crazy, fanatical religious people in Lynchburg, Virginia. And I had to grow up with these crazy, fanatic religious people. Right now, Jerry Falwell is in a lot of trouble. Right now, it's in the news today that he's being forced to resign from Liberty University because he had his arms around a girl and he had his pants unzipped.
Yeah, I saw that.
So it's amazing, he has to resign from his position at the university because he had his arms around a girl. Like this terrible thing, he had his arms around a girl, So, but that's the way Liberty University is now. I had constant dealings with him because my mother was a child psychiatrist, and the followers of Jerry Falwell tend to be crazy.
Yeah.
So my mother was a psychiatrist treating these crazy people who were members of Jerry Falwell's church, and my father was an income tax lawyer with the Internal Revenue Service, and he was always trying to beat Jerry Falwell for failing to pay his income taxes on his moral majority. So my father was trying to put Jerry Falwell in jail, and my mother was trying to have Jerry Falwell people confined to a mental institution. And so we having constant conflicts with Jerry Falwell's church from the time I was a child. But they got the best of us because actually they finally kidnapped my mother and my daughter. They got my mother locked up in the nursing home in South Carolina, and they got my daughter kidnapped and given to a religious couple who wanted to raise my daughter as their child, even though she was my child. So I still have a case about this in courts pending in the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. The name of the case is Childress versus Sloan. Childress is a Jerry Falwell person who did a lot of things against me, and I've sued her and a whole bunch of all the judges in Lynchburg, Virginia, are members of Jerry Falwell's church. So you don't have a Chinaman's chance if you're in Lynchburg, Virginia, and you're not a follower of Jerry Falwell. You don't have a Chinaman's chance. But I've been fighting these people for the last 30 years. For 30 years, I've been fighting these people, and I hope someday to win. But that has all motivated me to run for election, because if I can ever actually get elected to some important position, like, for example, Congress or Senate or governor or almost anything, suddenly I'll have some influence because I'll be elected representative of the people. So that's what's actually motivating me to run for election. It's not for a Pyrrhic victory. It's not. I've got somebody behind it that if I can ever win one of these elections, then I can try to bring the powers that be down on Jerry Falwell, the church, and all these people that kidnapped my mother, kidnapped my daughter. You may have read the article that was posted on my Facebook page. I think you read that article already, didn't you? It was basically about the fact that the United States Securities and Exchange Commission spent a tremendous amount of time and effort to try to put me out of business, when actually I was a very small-time securities dealer. I mean, there was no reason for them to come after me the way they did. And
yeah.
What they did was I lost the case. I won the case. They lost the case in the United States Supreme Court.
Yeah, I did read that.
So that basically put them out of business. They used to suspend trading in securities without any reason. They would just suspend trading because they felt like it. But now they can't do that anymore. So I beat them in the United States Supreme Court. So I'm famous for that.
Yeah.
But what's all behind all this is because of this Jerry Falwell situation, where they want my children. They want all my. I have 10 children, by the way. So I'm kind of busy in that regard. And I suspect I have a few more children I haven't discovered yet. The last 2 children I found were from DNA testing.
Okay, gotcha.
I have a son who lives in Australia. He's Australian,
Oh,
When he
wow.
was my son, I had relations with his mother a long time ago.
Interesting. Well, you've also, done a lot in the chess world, written lots of books about that, traveled to, many different countries for your various chess exploits. Can you tell me a little bit about that, and maybe if you have any unique insights from the world of chess that you've attempted to apply to the world of politics, given both being such strategic games? I wondered if there's any crossover.
Well, I'm a foreign master of the game of Chinese chess, which is also called Shangxi. International chess, my rating only got up to about 2100. That's about as high as my rating got, 2100. And now it's dropped down quite a bit too, because now these days I'm playing against these 8-year-old kids, and every time I lose a game to an 8-year-old kid, I lose 30 rating points.
Yeah.
But if I beat the 8-year-old kid, I only gain 1 rating point. So
Okay.
all of a sudden my rating has dropped 200 points recently. But I still think I can beat him. I can get it back. I think I can get back those last 200 points. But I need to have. But right now they're not holding any tournaments. The tournaments aren't being held because of the coronavirus, as you know about.
Right.
So you can't go to a chess tournament anymore. But I still think I can play. I hope to be able to gain back those last 200 points I lost.
Interesting.
200 rating points.
Yeah. Well, do you have any interesting or insights into the presidential election right now? What's your opinion on the state of, Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, and where we're headed as a country?
Well, I certainly hope that Trump loses, and I'm not at all confident that Biden will win, because Trump is his people are crazy, like the Jerry Falwell people. No matter what Trump does is bad. The Trump followers think that's great. They no matter what he does, and no matter what Trump does, like there's been all kinds of things about Trump's sister thinks he's goofy and crazy. That's in the news today. But the people who are followers of Trump, that doesn't affect them at all. They say it's all nonsense. So no matter what Trump does is bad, he still comes out from under it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in 2016, you ran for the Democratic nomination, and you ran as an anti-war candidate, opposing the Afghanistan and Iraq wars that are going on currently and have been since I was a small child. Now that we've seen the DNC convention wrap up, with very little mention of policy, let alone foreign policy, it would seem that both of our major parties are pretty thoroughly entrenched in our endless war policy of occupation and imperialism. What do you think the status of the anti-war movement is when both of the major parties are deeply pro-war?
I was in jail in Afghanistan. I speak the 2 languages, Pashto and Farsi. I learned those language in jail, and I was just enjoying myself. I bought a car in Munich, Germany. Bought a small Volkswagen VW, and drove that car all the way across to Afghanistan. And then I got arrested, and I got there just after the coup d'état. They took over the government of Afghanistan in 1978. They killed the prime minister of Afghanistan and installed a Soviet stooge named Taraki. Taraki took over, and Taraki put me in jail in Afghanistan. And fortunately, I got released by the intervention of. First, I escaped from jail, but then they caught me again, and then the second time, the American Embassy found I was in jail, and they finally released me. And the guy who released his name was Sayyid Dawood Tarun, and he was the security officer of Afghanistan. He released me from jail, and then about a month later, he was killed in the fighting between the different factions of Afghanistan. So I know a lot about Afghanistan, but I never went back there. Since 1978, I have never returned back to Afghanistan, because it's a very dangerous place. They still think I'm a spy. I was in jail for being a spy, basically. Of course, it's ridiculous to think of me as a spy, but anyway, that's what they thought. So then I went over to Chitral, which is in northwest Pakistan. I got married twice, and I got 2 children from that marriage. But I've never been able. But I did actually bring one of my children to America, and she lives in Seattle, Washington, in northwest part of the United States, in Seattle too. So I have a daughter named Shamima, who's my daughter from Afghanistan.
Interesting. And
so that's sort of a summary of my history over there.
And just to verify, you still hold your anti-war beliefs as far as the fact that we should get out of those wars. If you were elected president or something, would you make that happen?
The Afghanistan case is the not a simple question, because we do not want the Taliban to move in and kill the people, start killing people again. Actually, one good thing that Trump has done, even though I'm completely against Trump, but he has actually he's kept us out of war. George W. Bush started a war with Afghanistan, and even Obama started a war, and everybody else started with. Trump has so far not started any wars.
Yeah.
So in that sense, that's the one thing that Trump has done or not done that I agree with, that he didn't get us involved in any new wars.
Yeah.
But the question is, should we completely pull out of Afghanistan, knowing that the Taliban will take over again? I even have a girlfriend from Afghanistan who's one of my closest friends, and she also thinks the Americans should stay there, because otherwise, to prevent the Taliban from taking over, because the Taliban is really terrible people.
For sure. Well, thank you for that insight. Another question I've had is, you've voiced opposition to universal health care, Medicare for all, like Bernie Sanders proposed, calling it a communist plot. Do you think that the healthcare system that the rest of the world has embraced, the rest of the developed world, is inferior to our for-profit healthcare system, and why?
Well, Bernie Sanders is just a crazy communist. That's all he is. He's simply a communist. Even Mayor Bloomberg called him a communist in the debates. He really is a communist. And we just don't have the money for universal health care. It's just too expensive. We can't afford it. So I'm not in favor of that. Now, Joe Biden has blackmailed Bernie Sanders because Bernie Sanders was fighting against Hillary Clinton in 2016. Bernie Sanders was fighting against Hillary Clinton down to the very end and attacking her all the time. And that's the reason why Hillary Clinton lost the election to Trump. So it's because of Bernie Sanders against Hillary Clinton, vehemently attacking Hillary Clinton all the time, that we got Trump as our president. See, it's all Sanders' fault that we have Trump, because, of course, Hillary lost by a very narrow, very small margin. Had it not been for Sanders and against Hillary all the time, Trump would not be a president. But anyway, we're stuck with him. Now, the same thing happened again. Did you see the roll call in the Democratic National Convention last week?
Yeah.
They took a vote count, and there were, Sanders got about 1/3 of the votes, and so he was still running. Even up until last week, he was still running against Trump. I mean, still running against Biden. So Sanders still is making trouble for Biden, making it harder for Biden to concentrate on running against Trump. And they're going to use that against him. They're going to say, "Oh yeah, Trump, when he runs against Biden, he's going to say, well, Biden is supported by this crazy communist Sanders, so it's like he's being blackmailed, but it's hard for him to get out of this. But I hope that Biden wins. I'm completely supporting Biden.
Interesting. You also ran for Congress in the 13th District of New York, primarying the extremely popular incumbent Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. How did that primary go?
It's terrible, and I didn't do very well. I have a complaint about that. They wouldn't let me debate. They had debates on New York One, and on various TV shows had debates, but I was not allowed in the debates. You won't see me in there, and I think I should have been given a chance to. I had no chance against her. If I can't get into debates, then how can I run against her? I still don't know why they wouldn't allow me in the debate. They allowed all the other candidates except for me in the debates. I still haven't been able to find out. They want to answer the question why I wasn't allowed to debate against her. But definitely, she's not representative of this district. In fact, my children, I have 10 children. My children wanted to get jobs. There was going to be an Amazon distribution center built in Queens, actually in exactly the neighborhood where my children live, where 3 of my children live, and they were hoping to get jobs there. And because of what AOC did, chasing Amazon out of there, that my children didn't get the high-paying jobs that they thought they were going to get. So my whole family is against AOC, not just me.
Interesting. Well, it's definitely interesting that you ran against her, and it is unfortunate that you weren't able to get any debate time, because that is obviously an essential part of the process. I also wanted to ask you about, the Supreme Court case, SEC versus Sloan, where you became the last non-lawyer to win a case before the Supreme Court, something that can no longer be done since 2013. Essentially, you argued that taking on a consecutive 10-day summary suspension orders for an indefinite period was an abuse of the SEC's authority and a deprivation of due process. But it seems that there's a bit more of the story to that. Could you tell us a little bit about how that began and how the case made it to the highest court and won?
Well, first let me give you a general overview. There used to be a lot of securities firms. You're probably too young to know this, but there used to be a lot of small securities firms, like, for example, Thompson, McKinnon, Walston and Company, John J. O'Kane, Kidder Peabody, dozens of little securities firms, not big securities firms, dozens of little securities firms, like people who walk in and invest their money in the over-the-counter stocks, New York Stock Exchange, American Stock Exchange, all these different stock exchanges, and try to make a lot of money. And I was specialized in over-the-counter trading, over-the-counter stocks. Well, now what has happened since then, people don't quite realize this. I don't see anybody doesn't see that. All those securities firms are out of business. Every single one of them is closed down. Even the big ones like Bear Stearns, Smith Barney, Solomon Brothers. All those firms have been put out of business by the SEC. They just went. I don't know what Congress doesn't seem to realize what happened. That there's a crazy guy named Stanley Sporkin who was appointed as securities treaty. There's an old story about this. Franklin D. Roosevelt he appointed Joseph Kennedy Jr. Joseph Kennedy was the first chairman of the Securities Exchange Commission. And somebody asked Roosevelt why he appointed Joseph Kennedy as the first chairman of the Securities Exchange Commission, and he said because it takes a crook to catch a crook. So Joseph Kennedy was the father of President John F. Kennedy, and he was a big enough crook that he was appointed the chairman of the Securities Exchange Commission. But then later on, Stanley Sporkin was appointed chairman of the Securities Exchange Commission. Actually, he was appointed enforcement to the Securities Exchange. Now, this man knew nothing about securities, nothing, not a single thing at all. Somehow or another, he got this job as being the enforcement chief of the Securities Exchange Commission. So he's creating new laws and then charging people for violating their laws, putting them out of business, and so on and so forth. And yet the man had no knowledge whatever about securities. Now, I grew up I learned about securities on my father's knee because my father was a special agent for the United States Treasury Department, and he was also a director of the Internal Revenue Service. So my father knew everything about securities, and he taught me about securities. I learned it on my father's knee, so I know everything about securities. And Stanley Sporkin knows nothing at all about securities. So he went around putting all these big securities firms out of business, and that meant that people who invested their money in the stock market lost their money because once he closed down all the market making firms, then if you own a stock, you can't sell it to anybody because there's no market makers left to buy the stock. So all the market makers, which included me, I was making a market about 500 stocks. All the market makers are closed down, put out of business, and that means all those people who not unwillingly had invested their money in the stock market and lost their money. Now if you turn on the TV, it has a bunch of firms advertising securities, but like Fidelity, and you see all these ads on the TV. But all the traditional securities firms are out of business. They won't see them anymore. Like, for just an example, Thompson, McKinnon, I can just go down the list. Walston and Company, Edwards and Hadley, they're all out of business. And this is done by the Securities Exchange Commission. They close them down one by one, and then I filed this case. So then they put me out of business too. I fought them all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. I won the case. Even though I won the case in the United States Supreme Court, they put me out of business too. So all the people who invested their money in securities lost their money. They don't really understand what happened. If you go in your grandfather's safe deposit box, you'll see some stock certificates there, and you don't realize that the reason why those securities cannot be sold anymore because the SEC closed them down.
Fascinating.
I have a long-running beef against the Securities Exchange Commission, especially against Harvey Pitt, who was my opponent in the oral argument in the United States Supreme Court.
Fascinating. Well, Sam, do you have any plans to run again for the future for office, for the presidency? What's coming up for the future for Sam Sloan?
All I'm doing is publishing books right now. I published 1,051 books, And the book I published this morning is a reprint of a famous old book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. You must have heard of that book, right?
Yeah.
You've heard of that book, So I reprinted Uncle Tom's Cabin this morning. I'm surprised I didn't do it. That's the second biggest selling book in the world, second to the Bible. And I reprinted, but I go around finding these old books that are out of print and in public domain, and reprint them. And I reprinted a chess book like this morning. I reprinted a book called Logical Chess Move by Move. I reprint a lot of chess books because I'm a chess player.
Yeah.
And I know which books are good and things like that,
Cool. So no more plans to run for office in the near future?
No more plans to run for office. Well, I just have the things I plan to do tomorrow. I don't think that far in advance like that,
Yeah. Well, Sam, it was great catching up with you, and it's fascinating talking to you. You've had a great, fascinating life, and it's really interesting to hear about all your various exploits. Thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. It was great to talk to you.